Welcome to this session that we are calling What Every Program Manager Should Know About SiD Data Oversight. Today is Valentine's Day, February 14th, or Galentine's Day for some of us. Welcome aboard. And like I said, we only have an hour, so I'm just gonna start moving along. And I do want to let you all know that we do sometimes try to leave space for questions at the end, and I don't know if we'll have too much time within the hour, but I'll be happy to hang out after and answer any questions as needed. And as always, you can always email us with questions. And quick intros from myself and Mary. We'll put our camera on for a moment to say hi. Hi, I'm Jenny Flickabeer, and I support SiD, and Mary's here.
Yep. Hello, hello.
And then we're going to turn our cameras off. But thanks for coming, everyone. And I also wanted to point out that we have our SiD support email here. So if you aren't able to stick around afterwards for questions, you can always email us, and we are pretty good at getting back really quickly. And yes, Julie, the picture, I should point that out. Mary comes home to see family, and then we always try to get together, and it's really fun. Get together in person. Otherwise, we've been Zooming like everyone else. All right, so here's the agenda for today. So like I said, we often do, so many of our sessions are really in the minutia of the nitpicky details of data entry and data rules and stuff. And we wanted to have a little bit more of a bird's eye view, kind of an oversight on what you as managers or program coordinators, what you can be keeping your eye on to make sure that everything's getting in, everything is clean, and things to keep your eye on, reports you can run. So we thought we'd have a session just kind of focusing on that. And it seems like people are happy to have it because we had quite a big crowd register. So we're going to start with classes and just oversight, looking over all your classes, how they are tagged. Are they appropriately labeled as DL or whatever? Next, we're going to look at attendance and some of the reports you can run to just kind of monitor trends, make sure attendance is being taken, that kind of thing. MSGs, which is the measurable skill gains. We used to always just basically describe them as level gains, but now there's a few more options. So measurable skill gains. And then a little bit about staff and volunteers. And again, you don't see students on here because our other sessions, we talk so much about student records and student this and that. And as program managers and coordinators, we wanted to highlight how I'm just kind of cleaning up staff and volunteer records and keeping that information up to date. Okay. So we're going to start with classes. So if you generally put in your classes into the system, if you're creating the class records, you've seen this screen a million times. And if you don't do that, if somebody else on your staff is the one who puts in the class records, maybe you aren't familiar with this screen. But what this screen on the right here is the class creation screen. So when you create a class, you put in a ton of information, and then you kind of maybe don't think about it again a lot. But we're going to go over a little bit of that because there's a lot of detail associated with each class that it's good for you to kind of always have your eyes on, such as the attendance type, whether it's scheduled or lab, the hotline visibility, whether the class is going to show up on the hotline. That's over here. Hotline contents over here. Other labels such as IET and more. Workplace literacy, there's grants, all kinds of things. All this information you put in about your classes. And then, like I said, you maybe don't take a look at that very much after the fact. So let's take a look at where you can see that information and kind of keep your eye on it and make sure things are correctly labeled. So of course in SiD, if you look at you're in SiD and you click on the classes tab, this is what we call the grid of class list. And it lists all your classes, the schedule ID of the class, the days, the times, the staff, the room, start time, end time, when there was last attendance, etc. But every single piece of information associated with class cannot be listed here. It's just you run out of real estate. So because of that, we also have a report that I want to draw your attention to. So this report is called the Class Information Report. And you can find this report on the class tab, on the reports tab in SiD. And we have, as you are probably familiar, we have tons of reports on the report tabs. You have to scroll down and down to a section called lists for students and classes. And the very bottom one is called class information. And that is a newly titled report. It used to be called class information hotline content or class hotline content, something like that, because when we first made it, we were kind of pinpointing and highlighting all the pieces of info associated with the hotline. But we've expanded what's on there, and we already had a lot of other information, so I decided to change the name. So it's called class information. And you're going to find on this report things like the hour type, the attendance type, the DL platform, hotline content, and more. A bunch of stuff that you can't see on that previous screen, the grid. There's just not enough room. So this is a good report that we like to remind folks about, so you can eyeball your whole program and make sure that you have classes labeled properly, etc. So here we have a screenshot of the report. And as you can see, I even have part of it cut off because this report goes very far to the right. So on the screen, you'll have to scroll over, but you can also, like all our reports, you can download it to Excel. So I want to highlight a few columns on here. The first two have to do with the hotline. So the report itself, as you can see, is for your whole site, and then it's chunked out into your subsites. You might have a couple different subsites, and then each individual class within each subsite. So the class name, and then more information that I'll go into. So the first column that I've highlighted here shows you whether or not you have told that subsite to be displayed on the hotline or not. Now, most subsites, when you create them, they are defaulted to yes, and then you can turn those off if you don't want them highlighted. If you don't want them displayed on the hotline. And that might be the situation where, for example, some programs create a subsite for all their waitlist classes or something, and they don't want that to be displayed on the hotline. So they can just turn that subsite off and they just use it sort of as a dummy subsite, you might say. Okay, so you can eyeball this, make sure you don't have any of your subsites displaying that shouldn't be, or you haven't accidentally hidden some of your subsites that you want to be visible on the hotline. The next column is whether the class is displayed on the hotline or not. Okay, so this is much more granular detail. Again, any new class you create will default to being displayed on the hotline as long as the subsite is on the hotline. But if you want one to not show, again, so if you have just one waitlist class and you just don't want that to show, then you can, on that class description page or the class creation page, there's a button to have classes not display. All right. So the next couple of columns are self-explanatory, the schedule ID, the class name. So the next one I wanted to highlight is something called grants. So if you remember back to that class creation screen, one of the fields is called grants, and it's just a blank field where you can type in anything you want. Now, I've considered, and maybe we'll just change this. I've considered changing that field name to keyword, or maybe we should change it to grant/keyword. Because I think the way it gets used mostly is you have a handful of classes that maybe aren't all at the same site, or there's one in the afternoon, one in the evening, and they're all your ELL3 classes or something, and you want to run a report of those two classes and they don't otherwise group together in any other way, you can put a keyword in both those classes in this grant column. And then many of our reports, when you run them, you can run them for that. You can type in that whatever grant word you put in, and you'll be able to run a report just for those classes, if that makes sense. It's very handy for coming up with a subset of classes for reports. Okay, the next column that I wanted to highlight is the class attendance type. And I want to draw a little attention to this because when you are making classes, one of the options is the class attendance type. It's going to be either a scheduled class, and those classes run from a start time to an end time, and that is the expectation that students will be there for that whole class. The other type is called lab type. Now, all distance learning classes should be created as lab type, because what you're going to do for those is For the distance learning, we also often put in like kind of oddball or even large chunks of hours. So it's nice to make that class as a lab style class. But the other type of class that you're going to want to use that class attendance type is an actual lab. So if you have an open lab where you have maybe a writing lab and it's available from 9 in the morning till noon and you have a teacher there and students can come when they are able, then you're going to want to assign that as a class attendance type lab, because some students might come at 9 and stay for half an hour, and other students might come at 10 and stay for 2 hours. And the lab attendance type of lab allows that flexibility when giving attendance. And I'll have a screenshot about that in a moment, but I just wanted to really draw your attention to it because I want to push the idea that you should use scheduled mostly, and you should only use lab if the class is truly a lab style class. And the reason I say that is it's just a little messier and it's a little bit easier to make mistakes when giving attendance in lab style. And because we allow DL hours to be put in the lab style, it won't block you if you're accidentally overlap some time in 2 lab classes, because we want to allow DL classes to be put in big chunks. I hope that makes sense. So I just want to draw attention to the fact that if you have a class that meets at a certain time and students are expected to be there from start to finish, you should be using the scheduled attendance type. Okay, something to just eyeball your list now and then. Okay. The next column is the time type. And this is mostly your classes are going to be either contact or distance learning. So one thing you do want to make sure your distance learning classes, such as MobiMax, where you're collecting your proxy hours. I always use MobiMax as the example in my head. There's other software programs, but make sure those are listed as distance learning, DL, and all your other classes should be contact. Counseling and testing is an hour type that gets counted on table A's, etc. So if you want to designate one as such, you can, but there's really no distinction between that. The biggie is DL hours. So we can run reports, or we can figure out which students have more DL hours than they have contact hours. So the designation of DL type hour does matter. Okay. The next column is DL program. So if you do have classes listed as DL, make sure that you've designated which DL platform or program is being used. As I said, like for some reason I have MobiMax in here for all the examples, but I know there's others. There's a whole long list of distance learning platforms. Make sure you're accurately listing those with the classes. And another column I wanted to highlight is a new one as of last year, around this time, actually. I think it was around January when we turned this on. And this is a way for you to designate the class interaction type of classes. So the options, you can see some of them here: in person, asynchronous, distance, high flex, synchronous, online. And we do have a handout that explains those different class interaction types. And, throughout COVID, when so many programs went online and then started really innovating with different types of classes and hybrids and high flexes, we thought it was important to actually track what type of classes are being offered around the state. So this is a field called class interaction, and it used to not be required, and now it is required. So when you create a class, you have to select one of these. Okay, Amy, I see that you said that almost all your classes are open lab. If they actually are an open lab and students can come and go, then that's appropriate. Just be very careful and make sure you're taking attendance the correct way. Okay, another couple of columns I wanted to highlight are these, which are have become more important recently because of some new MSGs that we'll talk about. But these are classes that have been designated as IET or workplace lit. And IET has been a label option in SiD for a long time, but we wanted to highlight it now because one of the MSGs, there's a couple new MSGs that can be utilized for students who are in IET classes. So it's particularly important to make sure that you look at your list of classes, make sure you've tagged the IET ones as IET, and the same goes for workplace lit. So we wanted to add those fields. And then the rest of the fields, I'm not highlighting specifically: the class start time, the class end time, and then all to the right are the different content areas that you can tag to describe what content is taught in the class. so that when students or potential students or job counselors who are assisting students go look at the hotline, they can see what types of class offerings and what subject areas are covered. Okay. One last thing about this report I should say is when you first run it, it's going to run it for today's date. So it's going to show you all the classes that are active like right now. But that like almost all our reports, there's a date range option. So you can backdate it to 7/1/2022 to look at all the classes you had throughout the year. Because if you did, for example, if you have forgotten to label a class as IET, you can go back and that class has ended. You can add that tag now. And then at the end of the year, when end of year reporting is done, that'll be properly tagged. So you might find a reason to run this report for your whole program year, not just for whatever classes are active today. All right. Somebody asked, for regional classes, should class information be consistent among all sites? We just started regional classes, and this has been a topic of discussion. I think, are you talking about when the classes are, when regional might mean a couple different programs or different sites? That is a complicated topic. And in some cases, we have to look at the exact class that you're talking about, but the class that's hosting, they're taking attendance for some of the students, so they should make sure all their information is accurate. And then the program that's sending students might be able to keep a little bit less info, but if they're taking the attendance for the students, they might need to label it all correctly, but if they don't want it on the hotline, then they should undesignate it. So honestly, for some of these situations, you might have to contact us directly for the exact example. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. It's super complicated. Okay. All right, so I just did quickly want to highlight the difference between the scheduled attendance and the lab attendance, as I mentioned before. So when you create a class with scheduled attendance, when you go and give attendance, and now a lot of you folks, if you're managers and you're doing oversight, maybe you don't give attendance, but this is what the attendance screen looks like for a scheduled class. So the teachers listed actually, the volunteers and all the students will be listed down here. The start time of the class is in this first drop down and the end time of the class. So students who come for the entire class, they can just click their name over here, the box, and that's going to give them full attendance. But they can, if they show up late or leave early, the toggles can be toggled to accurately display that and then clicked. But you can't go, you could just quickly click everyone to say they were all there the whole time. The expectation is there that they're the whole time. That's the type of class called scheduled attendance. Lab style attendance, it's going to show the start time of the lab. So if you have a lab that meets, like I said, from 9 until noon, and students can kind of come and go, it's going to have the start time in that first toggle, and then just a box where you type in the number of hours that the student was there. So it's a lot more flexible. So if you do have labs, this is a good way to take attendance, but you do have to remember to toggle. So let's say the student came at 10, you want to toggle and put 10 and then 2 hours or whatever. But it does leave a little bit more flexibility for mistakes to be made as well, it feels like. So I just want to emphasize using scheduled when appropriate. Okay, and since we covered some hotline items on that previous report, I wanted to quickly talk about the hotline so you can see where that information goes. So the hotline is run by the Minnesota or Literacy Minnesota. It's a searchable website, as you should be aware, and it directs potential students to find classes in their interest area, ABE classes throughout the state. So all programs in SiD are in this hotline. And you can go look at the hotline if you want at the website hotline.mnabe.org. When you get there, you can see this blue screen that is searchable. It's going to find classes within a designated distance of mile. You can toggle that to have it look at a wider, what's the word, circumference. You can type in a zip code or address. The students can check off the subject areas they're interested. Morning, evening, whether the class is in person or online, that uses the class interaction tag I talked about, and other services. All classes are all programs who have not turned off their subsites from the hotline do appear on the hotline. This is just an alphabetized list of all of them, I think. But if a student searches with a zip code and a distance area and content area, this list is going to narrow down to just the ones that are in their area, and they can click on it. And then they will see this screen on the right. So if they get to this program, this Albert Lee is an example. All those classes that I talked about on the previous report, the ones that are visible on the hotline are going to be listed here with just some basic info. This is not for the student to actually sign up for the class. It's just for them to get a sense of what classes are offered. You can see the content areas. Whatever you tagged for the class will show up here. All of that comes from SiD and it comes live. So when you make changes to classes, that info is going to change here on the hotline. Also on the hotline is the contact info of whoever you have as the contact info for the SiD subsite. So if a person does change, a staff person, you need to go in SiD to the subsite information and update either the phone number or the email of the contact person so that the proper person will appear here. Okay, so that's why it's pretty important also to keep your classes up to date, even with things that maybe you're not checking in on as much, like the content area, because that's going to be out there for the world to see on the hotline. And so we suggest you do regularly check your hotline, you know, maybe quarterly or every term or something to make sure things are appearing as you think they should, to make sure that nothing's missing as far as like an accidentally hidden subsite, and to make sure the ones that do appear should. We recommend doing that, as I said, periodically. Okay, let's talk about attendance. All right, some attendance oversight. I just wanted to highlight some reports, and probably you're already running these, but I just want to make sure you're aware of a few reports that are out there that are pretty good for monitoring trends in attendance, to making sure that your attendance is being entered regularly, and to remind you that teachers also can monitor their own class attendance. Just something that can, so a lot of this stuff can be done from kind of the macro level, but can also be done at the classroom level by teachers. And I know also a lot of you probably from smaller programs in particular, you might be the manager who's also teaching. So a lot of you have roles that you're kind of looking at things from the very detailed level as well as the oversight level. So this is a screenshot of our reports tab again. And the ones we're going to look at are highlighted here. They're in the first section of attendance reports. So take a quick look. So this report is called All Classes Attendance by Month. Okay, so I always kind of chuckle when I read the names of the reports because they're so kind of boring and generic, but I think they do a good job of telling you what the report is. So when you run this report, you're going to see that the date defaults for the whole program year. So it's going to start, and when I say program year, it's an NRS year. Now that makes me wonder if I should change this to 5-1, because that's the funding year for which you are pretty interested in hours. So the dates are flexible, so you can alter them yourself, but it's going to default to 7-1 to today. And then it runs again. Each subsite is listed in its own sort of chunk here, and then each class, and then it shows the total of hours in each of the months for that class. So this is maybe a good way to go and look and see, okay, some of my classes seem to be growing, some are, you know, shrinking, maybe you need to merge classes, or maybe you had a month where the attendance was very strange and you look and it turns out the teacher was sick and the sub forgot to put the attendance in. So you can kind of see trends for your whole site at a glance, month attendance. So I think that's a good one. The next report I want to highlight is called the All Classes Headcount report. Now, when you run this, it's going to run it for, I think, 2 months automatically, last month and this month, maybe. And this is a little different. Takes a second to kind of remember what you're looking at. But again, it's going to do subsites, each class, and then each date of the month for which there is attendance somewhere in your program. And then it's going to show you the head count. So this is going to be not how many hours were earned in that class, but how many students were given attendance. So this is a nice one. Back when I worked at a large program, we would have a staff person looking at this regularly. One, to make sure the attendance was being taken. Teachers should know that. They get a little signal on their attendance screen if one of the dates on their calendar doesn't have attendance, but it's a good to have a second set of eyeballs. Again, also good to see trends, which classes have a lot of students, which have few students, and also maybe trends like this one. you can kind of see that they have good, 7 people, 6 people, and then one day there's one, and maybe that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then this next week, a lot of people. And then on Friday, just one. So maybe you can see trends like that as well. And maybe you might want to adjust your schedule. So this is a good report for getting a nice glance at how many bodies are in the rooms for all your different classes. Of course, I shouldn't say it like that because some of these are online. So many bodies are in the Zoom in some cases. Another report, which is similar to the last one because it's going to do day-to-day attendance, but this one is hours per day. So that last one was looking at just numbers of students per day. This one is going to look at how many hours were, given attendance for each class for each day. But you're going to look for similar trends probably. And you're going to see if attendance wasn't taken on certain days when it should have. And finally, another report that I wanted to highlight is something called the Site 5-Year Attendance Report. And this one just takes a few seconds to run, especially if you're a big program, because it's calculating all the attendance hours of every month for the last 5 years. So you can go back then and you can see the total devastation that took place during the COVID years, and then see if your hours are growing every month since then. The COVID year has made everything so crazy, but normally you would look back maybe just the last year or two to see if your attendance is growing or shrinking. It's a nice way to eyeball glance your overall attendance in comparison to previous years. Okay. So next we're going to just talk kind of briefly about measurable skill gains, MSGs. And now that the report card is back in action, I think we have had a few questions from programs asking about MSGs in this report, which I think is great. That means people are looking, they're checking out how they're doing as a program, how their level gains are appearing. So this report is called the Level Gain MSG and Post-Test Rates report. And of course, like all our other reports, it's back on the report tab on I think the section is called accountability reports. And so this report, which you're all familiar with, I'm sure, but now that we're getting to the second half of the program year, the data on here is going to get more and more relevant as you've been giving more students post-tests. They've been around for half the year, et cetera. So a quick glance at the report. This divides your students into levels, the ABE levels and the ESL levels, and it slots each student into one of the levels dependent on their pretest. And then it counts up how many students in each of those levels, how many hours they earned. I should pause for a second. This report does default to participants. So that's students with 12 or more hours because participants are the group that we report to the feds. It does have some info if you have a super site. It has average number of hours for each of those groupings, which I think is interesting to look at when you're starting to try to get a handle on which students are coming a lot, which students are showing gains, et cetera. You'll see that certain subsets of students seem to have higher rates of attendance. It has a column for whether the student has a post-test and then the summary for the group. The percentage of students who have a post-test, which also I think this is going to be an important column for you to keep your eyes on. Then all the various measurable skill gains. And as you're probably aware, as sent out down here on the highlighted at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to point out that there was a technical assistance email from MDE that went out about some of these new MSGs. So if this information is kind of new or still feels a little fuzzy to you, make sure and go back and take a look at that email. But let me talk through the MSGs very quickly. The first MSG is the one we are all traditionally used to, which is the level gain MSG based on pre-tests and post-tests, showing if your student made a level gain in the NRS system. The second column is for students who earned a diploma. So that could be a local credit-based diploma or the not new anymore, the state competency diploma. This next one is also kind of MSG2, and that's GED students. And we separated those two so you can kind of, if you want to pinpoint them a little closer, you can open it up and look at them. And then the new MSGs are highlighted here in gray. All of these are only eligible for students who are either IET or workplace. And actually only one is allowed for the workplace students. And I think that's number 4, the milestones. So if you do not have IET programming or workplace programming, these are going to be all zeros for you all the time. Sorry. The first one is a new MSG for students who earn post-secondary credits. And there's, like I said, in the technical assistance, there's more details about what qualifies. The MSG 4 is milestones for students who are in IET or workplace. And again, the technical assistance has more detail about that, and they have to be milestones developed with the workplace. And then finally, MSG 5 is for credentials earned. And we have a list of credentials in SiD that you can track, even if you're not IET. But students who are IET also then can get a gain, MSG 5. All right, and then if they have an MSG of any kind, they get counted here. They get counted just once. So even if they have a level gain and they have a credential earned in their IET, that'll count them as one, because we're just counting how many students have a gain, not how many gains are occurring. That makes sense. And then finally, the percentage of students who have an MSG, which we're all, I think, familiar with. We all focus on that right away. And over here is the NRS target. In other words, it's the goal that the feds have set for our state to meet. So this program that I ran, they're already at 24% having a gain, and the goal is 27%. And if you recall, in years past, there used to be a goal for every single level, and now they just have an overall goal. And in fact, the overall goal for ABE and the overall goal for ESL is the same. I think we just get one goal now. And finally, we added this table over here to the right to kind of help you. This table will only appear if you have students, if you have IET programming or the workplace literacy programming. And we put this here so that you can kind of double check to make sure you have students who should be counted, they're being counted. Just to kind of cross-check your information, since this type of MSG and this kind of importance of tagging IET people and workplace people appropriately, that has become more relevant this year. So we wanted to kind of highlight that subgroup so we can all kind of double check and make sure everything's being counted. Okay. So as I mentioned a little bit about post-testing, so it's the time of year, like I said, we've gotten questions from programs. So we know that folks are looking, and this is really great. You're keeping an eye on your MSG, your overall percentage, whether you're reaching that goal. And then I know programs are starting to look at each level group to maybe, is there folks that we should target? And so I want to just talk quickly about a couple reports you can run to help you pinpoint people who are either eligible for post-testing or those who don't have gains yet. Okay, so I think that's where a lot of focus should be at this point if you're starting to turn your eyes toward improving your level gains and your MSGs. Okay, so we have a couple reports. I'm just going to highlight really quickly, briefly. One is the level gain report that we just looked at. I'm going to look back at that for a second because I want to point out that if you click this plus sign next to any of the levels, you're going to see all the students in that level. And then you're going to see all this information for each of those individual students. So you could kind of scan through that group and find people who don't have gains yet. And you can start to target them, but you'll be able to do that on another report as well. But there's more info in this report if you dig deep. Okay. And then we have something called the assessment history report, which I'll show a screenshot in a moment, but you can run that for your whole program. And I would suggest, though, if you have a big program, you probably only really want to run that for classes or subsites, because it's going to get kind of overwhelming if you run it for your whole program. It lists every student at their last assessment, and then it tells you whether they're eligible for another test yet. It tells you if they already have a gain or not. It has a lot of info on it. So it could be overwhelming if you do it for a whole program. But if you're a small program, this would be a good tool to use to determine who's ready to test and if you really want to start targeting people who don't have a gain. And then we have a couple classroom-based reports. As I mentioned earlier, I always think it's good to get the teachers involved in that level of detail, have them keeping an eye on which students in their classes are either eligible to test or If they have a gain, maybe they don't need to focus on testing them, and then they can focus on those who don't yet have a gain. Okay, so here are two of the reports. This first one, this is just half of it, cut it off. This is that one assessment history report that I mentioned, and it's going to list the most recent test in every single testing category, subject area. So if your student takes process and they've done listening and reading, it's going to show the most recent one in each one of those. This person has a TABE language, a TABE math, and a TABE reading. It lists each student. It shows when the test happened, which test it is, the form, the score, and then this is where it gets really important. It shows how many hours of attendance they have since that test. If they're eligible to test because it's been 40 or more hours, this will highlight in green and say true. It'll also show you if they already have a level gain in this subject or if they have a level gain in general and what their pre-EFL was. So again, if you want to target, there's a lot of toggles on this report at the top, parameters. So you could run this just for students who have no level gains yet, if you just want to highlight those, or you can run it just for students who are eligible to test. You can also narrow it down to just certain tests. If you just want to run, okay, we're going to do CASAS reading. We're going to do big program-wide testing next week. Let me just run the list of those who are eligible for just the CASAS reading. And so you can narrow it down that way. And you can narrow it down by subsite, like I said, and you can narrow it down by class as well. You just want to run them for classes and then help your teachers get those students tested. Now, for a different way of viewing of a lot of the similar information is that the teacher, when the teacher goes into SiD, normally the first thing they do is they go to their attendance tab, but they also have this other tab called the assessment tab. And that's going to list everyone in their class and the most recent test that they took in each of the different subject areas. But this is one of those kind of live grids where they could then type in these boxes to narrow down the list. So if they want to just look at reading, for example, they can type R into this subject box and it'll just show the reading. The first column I should definitely draw attention to is it's going to show you who is eligible to retest based on their number of hours. So the teacher can also just toggle this and look for just people with the check mark, and then they'll see everyone who's eligible to retest in their class. And then let me just jump all the way over to the right. And that shows whether they have a gain on this test subject area, the first one, or if they have a gain in general. So if you really are getting to the point where you're just trying to highlight or focus in on the students who haven't shown a gain yet, you can narrow down your list here as well. And then teachers can play a role in pulling together which students need testing. Finally, we have one other report that highlights the diploma or diploma equivalency goals and gains. And we've separated them out because I know programs like to look at those individually and like to double check that that info is being properly tracked in SiD. So this report is in the same area on the report tab, and it's called the NRS Primary Goals Report. And like I said, it highlights students who either have the GED passed, the local credit-based diploma, or the state competency-based diploma. Now, we do data match. So if a student did pass the GED, twice a month, we get a data file from the Department of Ed, and we do a data match in SiD, and we'll assign the goal of passed to any student who we find a data match with. The local credit-based diploma, if you are a program, I think there's only a handful around the state. If you are doing local credit-based diploma, you have to go in and give the student the goal met for that item. So this is a good place to go look and make sure you've been staying on top of assigning those goals. And then the state competency-based diploma will also automatically get assigned to any student for whom the Department of Ed did approve and pass their competency-based diploma. So those should automatically fill in. Now, if you run this report and you see there's some students missing because you know that you had some who just passed the GED, you might want to make sure that student is a participant, meaning they have 12 or more hours this year, because this report will default to that. You can adjust it and look for just enrollees. But one heartbreaking thing is some of your students, you might not get credit for their GED if they were a student who was only around for like 10 hours. That's the first thing you'll notice if somebody doesn't appear here. Another possibility is maybe they spelled their name differently when they registered to take the GED from what you have in SiD. So their data didn't match. So we do get periodically, we get emails from programs saying, oh, my student got the GED, but they didn't get the goal on the data match. And then we work with them to figure out, okay, there's a misspelling or there's some other data element that the birth date was in wrong, something made it so that the data didn't match. But we usually take care of those pretty quickly too. And again, since these are all MSGs and they will show up in your MSG report, you want to make sure they're all being tracked. Okay, and I just wanted to wrap up with cleaning up. Let's see, we have a few chats here. Somebody asked if we'll be sending the recording. They sent that to me directly, but we do record this session and it will be on the ABE YouTube. We put all our recordings up there and we do link to them all from our help system in SiD. So if someone asked if a student is shared between two consortium and completes a GED, does the MSG show up for both? It'll show up, yes, it will show up for both if they are participant in both. So, so if they got all of their hours at the other site, they're only going to show up on that one. Does that make sense? And that's how level gain reports work that way too, the testing gains. So if you share a student and they took 20 hours at your program and 100 hours at another program, you both get it on your level gain report that you report to the state. So Sally asked if they managed to get their GED with less than 12 hours in your program, we don't get credit for an MSG. That is correct. As far as that report, the level gain and MSG report, because that we are only reporting participants, students with 12 or more hours. And so that's the minimum number of hours is 12 or more hours in order for a student to get that MSG on that level gain report. Okay. So we wanted to highlight just kind of a little bit of oversight on making sure the staff who are in SiD, who you have listed in SiD, are indeed still active, they're teaching or they're working as data folks, intake folks, to make sure that you accurately have them labeled as currently active, and volunteers as well. And the way you do that is very similar for both staff and volunteers. And if they aren't active anymore, we want to make sure you remember to remove their login. It's 2 separate steps. So we just, and with more and more requirements about making sure you're tracking the types of trainings your volunteers are doing, and then next year, the types of training your staff are doing. You just want to make sure you have clean, accurate data of which staff are active in your program. And once a year, we do have to report the number of staff on what's called the NRS Table 7, and that gets counted accurately based on the active status of your staff and volunteers. Okay, so let's take a quick look at that. So the first thing I think that is important for you to do before thinking about this is thinking about which of your currently active staff or volunteers are in your program. And the reason I say that is because the next step is to look at a list of all your currently active students, and hopefully you can eyeball that list and say, oh, wait a minute, this person is designated as active, but they haven't been here for 5 months or whatever. So you got to know who's active in your program to make sure your data is accurate. And once you get it accurate and you keep it clean, then your data in SiD is going to be better at helping you know who's active or not, if that makes sense. So if you do find you have students who are on your active list, staff who are on your active lists, you're going to need to give them exit dates. I'll talk briefly about that, staff and volunteers. Then you're going to want to remove the login rights for any staff person who no longer works with you, unless they are shared with other programs. That's a little weird tidbit that we'll talk about. And then while you're thinking about it, we made a report to show you if there's any active logins for any of your former staff, which we went through and cleaned out. So hopefully you don't have any right now, but that's something that you should put into your routine, your data cleanup routine. Okay, so let's take a quick look. So if you go to the staff or volunteer tab, just in SiD, it's going to list all your staff or volunteers. This pages look very similar. And the last column is an active, and it's going to have a checkbox if the person is considered active right now. And it's going to be blank if they aren't considered active right now. So you can toggle this to look at just the active people. And then you're going to look at that list and say, are these people really active, or are some of these actually ended? We need to give them an end date. So I think that's a quick and easiest way. This is going to look at people who are considered active right now, this moment. Now for reporting purposes, you're going to want to report staff who are active during the program year. So we also have a report to help you find that. And this report is called the Staff and Volunteer Information Report. It is on the Report tab with everything else. And it's going to default, I think this one defaults to the program year. So the reporting staff report that you fill out called the NRS Table 7 is for the NRS year. So it's going to default to 7/1 last year to 6/30 next year. You're going to run a list. It's going to show you all your admin, counselors, paras on the first page, and then teachers on the next page, and volunteers on the next page. It has all kinds of information. You can toggle and only run it for people who are considered active right now, or in that date range, I should say. Or you could show everyone, and then there'll be a column that'll show you if they're true, yes, active in this date range, and or if they're active on what we call a snapshot date, which is used for that federal reporting I mentioned. Okay, so this is another way for you to see who is considered active right now, or who was considered active sometime during this year, and figure out if you need to do some cleanup and end some people. Let's take a quick look at how you would do that. So if you do find that you have some staff who should be actually no longer considered active, then what you need to do is you go to the staff screen and go to the history tab right here. And you just give them, pick the date when they no longer were active with your program. And if it was sometime last year, and maybe you don't remember the exact date, but you know they were not active this program year beginning July 1st, you can just put June 30th of last year. You're going to select program exit entry status. From here, you'll select exit, and boom, they will now be considered no longer active. Okay, so make sure you do that. I don't know if you have, when staff leave your program, if you have sort of an exit process that you make sure you go through all staff records, you turn off you unenroll them from classes, you should give them an exit date. And then the next step, even though you've exited them, that did not turn off their login. So you have to do the next step of turning off their login. To do that, you go to the Accounts tab and you click Remove Login Rights. Okay, now in the very small scenario where you have a staff person who is shared with another program, and it does happen, and we just put in a new signal, which took the screenshot before it went live, I think, which will say shared staff, just like we have with students. If they are shared, if they have now worked at another program, if you've ended their role with you up here, you shouldn't necessarily remove their login rights, but they won't have access to your program anymore. If they've now logged into their new program, you don't have to worry about that. They can't get into your program, but you don't want to remove their login rights, because those login rights behind the scenes are listed for just that one single person, if that makes sense. If you have some confusion or question, or you're just not sure that makes sense, feel free to email us with a question, especially about the specific person, and we can help sort out what's going on. And like I said, we have a new report. Again, here's a picture of the report tab in SiD. We have a new report called Exited Staff with Active Login. And this is going to highlight just staff who've exited your program. So you did give them the exit date. Maybe they finished in December, they retired. So they have an exit date with your program. That's great, but their login wasn't removed. So basically this report is for highlighting and finding those who you need to turn off their login. So you click that. You should have nobody in here because we went and cleaned out all old staff that still had an active login. But what you might have is two tables. The top table is going to show staff in your program, and they've only worked for you. They aren't shared with another program. It's going to have their name, their badge ID, whether they are teacher or admin, etc. Their first entry, so when you gave them an entry date on their history page, or when you first created their record. It's going to show their exit date. So if you did go ahead and give them an exit date, that'll be here. But if they still have an active login, this is going to say yes. It'll show their last login date as well. And like I said, we did some cleanup and nobody had actually login dates recent. But we just think you still need to clean that out. If you click this yes, it's going to bring you directly to that account screen where you can then click remove login. So if you run this right now, hopefully you shouldn't have anybody in this square up here, this table, because it's all been cleaned. But we're going to add this to sort of your, we have a a data cleanup system that we recommend people do regularly. We're going to add this on there. The second table is for teachers who are shared with other programs. And like I said, if they've exited from your program and they now have been active and you gave them an exit date on their history, and they now are logging in to another program, you don't have to worry about them. They're not going to be able to come in and see your site. But if you're not sure, if like, oh, maybe they are shared, but doesn't seem like they're logging in at that other program either, maybe they should have their login removed, you can contact us or contact the other program to double check. But I would say be very wary about kind of doing anything with these down here, the shared ones, and you can contact us if you have any questions. One other cleanup regarding staff that I just wanted to highlight is we do have a report called Ended Classes with Enrolled Students. Enrolled people. And this is on our list of things to do quarterly or monthly. This lists all the classes that have ended. They have end dates, but still have either students enrolled in them, because you do have to go in and unenroll the students, or still have staff enrolled in them. So we recommend you go and look at this regularly. You can click on the name of the class. It will bring you to that class page where you can go ahead and go through the process of dropping those, either staff, volunteers, or students. So since we were talking about cleaning up staff, I wanted to make sure to include that. I see we have questions over there, but it looks like Mary has been answering them. So Mary, did I give you my name? Do we have wrong names? All right. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what we call the desk audit report, but we didn't want to highlight that today because this is way more than nitty gritty. We cover this report and a lot of other kind of nitty gritty details of data in, we had a fall data cleanup webinar. And then at the end of the year, year end, preparing for reporting, we go into a lot of detail on this report and other sort of more nitty gritty details of data. But I did want to highlight it. I should mention the fall data cleanup report. We did record that webinar. And so you can see that here. We have a link. We also have what I've been kind of referring to is we have something called the SiD monthly cleanup tasks, which is a help article on our help page. And we have a link directly to that. And that is a list of some of the reports you saw today, some other reports that we recommend you run monthly if you're a big program, or quarterly if you're a smaller program. It's going to highlight areas that need some cleaning up, like that screen just before this one about students who are classes that are ended but still have people enrolled. It talks about this desk audit in great detail and what you should look at on it. So I recommend, if you're not familiar with that, or if you don't have that routine yet where you're doing the monthly cleanup tasks, that you take a look and build that into your business processes. And again, so back to this desk audit report, we recommend you run it monthly. One of the reasons to run it monthly is if you do find like a student who maybe has a piece of information missing. If you run this often, you'll have a higher chance of that your student is still there, still enrolled, and you can go ask them if you have some missing information. And one thing we wanted to highlight today is the first thing on this report shows you how many students in your program have a Social Security number on file. And we do know that during COVID, when so much registration was happening from a distance, I think that piece of information was sliding through the cracks and people were waiting until students came in person so they could ask them. Instead, you don't want students emailing Social Security or whatever. So we just wanted to highlight, take a look at that. And the goal is that you have 70% of your students have, yes, their Social Security number on file. So if you're lower than that, we suggest you can click open the no, and you can see the names of the students who don't have one on file. And if they're there now and you feel more comfortable asking, now's the time to take care of that. And that is all for today. So opening it up for questions. I feel like we timed that really well. Wow, 2 minutes. Mary and I are planning the end of the year, preparing to run your report session, and it looks like it'll probably be Thursday, April 27th. So you can pencil that in. We will be sending out, once we finalize that, we will be sending out email and registration and everything. But I just wanted to get that in your brain. April 27th, did I say that right? Yes, Thursday. Thanks everyone for coming. Again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to hang out here. Maybe I should end the recording. I'm going to end the recording, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. And of course, as always, reach us at this email if you have questions, especially if your question is something specific about a specific student or staff, then we can take the time to look that student up and see if we can figure out what's going on.